Hi everybody, this is Georgianne Hughes, and this is The Bite Show. And once again, I'm very, very pleased to have with us Paul Collins. And Paul is an author, and he and his brother have authored a book called The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. Get this book. You've just got to get it. You can call 1-402-323-7800, or you can go to just the letter I, universe.com. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Unholy Matrimony, and that is the tie between the cult of intelligence and the cult of oligarchy. And this article is up at conspiracyarchive.com. Go there, get the article if you want, and read along with the audio file that we're about to do. Hi there, Paul.
Hi, Georgianne.
How are you doing?
Not bad.
On this sunshine-filled day.
Yeah.
It's a little warm here. Oh. Well, what is this all about? I mean, I've heard that, cult of intelligence, and boy, it sure is.
Oh, yeah. Well, what the article is basically dealing with is the idea of what the Central Intelligence Agency is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
The agency has a charter from the United States government, so many people think of it as a governmental agency. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at the founding fathers of the Central Intelligence Agency, what you find is that they were all from these power elitist, the power elite. They were from oligarchical families, oligarchical dynasties. And you look at the National Security Act of 1947, which basically created the Central Intelligence Agency, and you find a document that basically creates an organization that would act as the enforcement arm for the oligarchs.
Oh, boy.
And so that's what the article is dealing with. The fact that the Central Intelligence Agency, while it might have a government charter, is really representing private forces. And we have examples galore from across the globe of covert operations that were undertaken by the agency on behalf of multinational corporations, which are really the locus of power for the power elite. The power elite are the people who basically make up the board of directors of the different major multinational corporations. And you'd look at these different covert operations that are undertaken, and they're usually to advance the aims of the power elite, and and it's done on behalf of the power elite's different multinational corporations in these different countries. Probably the biggest example that people would probably have in their mind, that would probably come to mind, is Chile, when Allende came to power, Salvador Allende.
Yes.
He made moves to nationalize industry in his country, and certain companies like ITT, Anaconda Copper, PepsiCo, these companies became just very upset with this move on Allende's part. And the Central Intelligence Agency undertook covert operations in that country to basically destabilize Allende's government. and they helped a military coup and brought Augusto Pinochet to power. That's not to say that Allende was a great guy. He was a communist, and he had made it clear during the elections that whether or not he won, he intended on taking the government by force. But the important point to see is that good guy or bad guy or somewhere in between, Allende was going up against the power elite, and that's the wrong thing to do. And they have a way of dealing with individuals that get on a renegade trajectory when it comes to the world of power politics. Allende, his assassination is a big example. Manly's Jamaica is another example that we'll probably touch upon tonight. And there's even been talk of Hugo Chavez, his government in Venezuela, experiencing some destabilization campaign involving United States intelligence groups. And that's certainly not to put that man on a pedestal. Last time we spoke,
Yeah.
I had no kind words about Hugo Chavez.
No, I still don't.
No, the man is a communist dictator and a thug.
Right.
And he's basically using populist rhetoric to get people to think that he's a champion of the middleman, of the little man, that is.
Poor people, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
In their dreams.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's duping a lot of people right now because he's got this deal with Citgo gas to make sure that they're the cheapest gas out there, and that's basically peddling to the desperation of poor inner city people. But there is no doubt that he really doesn't care about the people at all, and you can just look at how freedom of speech has been suppressed and clamped down hard on in Venezuela.
That's right.
Yep, and you just can no longer doubt that that the man's a dictator. And I brought up last time a former Venezuelan Air Force individual, Juan Diaz Castillo,
Yeah.
who had claimed that this dictator Chavez had him arrange for $1 million donation to Al Qaeda. So, I mean, the man isn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but he still could very well have been, and I believe he was, a target of a destabilization campaign involving our intelligence community, probably with the CIA spearheading that whole endeavor. And like I said last time, the source of inspiration for this article was a teacher of mine at the community college here when I was still working to get my associate's degree.
Right.
And the man was recruited when he was in the Marine Corps by the Central Intelligence Agency to do intelligence work. And he had to take on a cover complete with a legend. A legend is your background story, created to mislead people as to who you are. A good example of this would be Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald's whole left-of-center activities seems to have been nothing more than a legend created to make him look like something that he was not.
Right.
And my teacher's legend was basically that he was a Canadian national that was running a trading post doing business with the indigenous population. And he got to speak with a lot of NVA and a lot of Viet Cong when he was there, and the way that his job was described, his job description was given unto him by his handlers at the Central Intelligence Agency was, they said, well, you're a nice person, get people to talk to you, and then tell us what they told you. And they'd tell him, they'd come and they'd do business with him, and they'd say, yeah, my uncle or cousin or whatever, my friend is up on this mountain or in this area right now, and he'd go and report back to his bosses, and lo and behold, that area would end up getting bombed or attacked.
Sure.
Just a few days later.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, my teacher made friends with a NVA general there during his intelligence work. This NVA general was, of course, under the impression that he was a Canadian, and they became really close friends. They're close friends to this very day, as far as to my knowledge. The last time that I had spoken to him, he was still very much friends with this man, because the man basically was instrumental in saving his life, and he still was sending, when I last saw him, he was still sending money to this man and to his family, and basically had made it clear that as long as that man was alive, that he would never be poor and he'd never be out of a house.
Yeah.
But this MVA general basically came up to my teacher one day and said, I'd like you to come with me to Hanoi and spend some time in Hanoi, and, because he basically trusted him. And my teacher didn't want to go, but when he had told his handlers at the Central Intelligence Agency about this, they said, what, are you nuts? Of course, yes, go. And collect intel and come back to us. Well, he went for 3 days, and he couldn't function correctly. He was scared out of his wits. He was the only white guy in the middle of the North Vietnamese country. And he came back, and they were dissatisfied thoroughly with the work that he had done, because he just couldn't function well and couldn't really collect intel altogether that great. And so somebody amongst his agency handlers spilled the beans and outed him, and his cover was blown, and these NVA guys came looking for him.
Oh, gee.
And the general shown up. His friend, this NVA general, shown up, and with his soldiers. And his soldiers, it was kind of a bad situation, because the soldiers wanted him dead, wanted my teacher dead, and the general didn't want to kill him. They were friends. And, but he was finding it hard to manage his soldiers, and, he was afraid that a fight would break out and that they might, basically turn on him too. So he said to my teacher, like, look, I'll take you back to Hanoi. Don't worry. I'll watch over you. I'll make sure that nothing happens to you. And they had him in the back of the transport vehicle, and they were spitting on him and cursing at him, and he knew he wasn't going to survive if he went back to Hanoi.
Yeah.
No matter what his friend promised him. There was no way that his friend could keep that promise, as much as he was probably sincere in saying so. And so he jumped off of this transport vehicle and ran, and his general friend got out and shot him in the legs, and basically saved his life by doing so, because otherwise one of the other guys would have shot him and would have aimed for something higher, and basically would have made it a lethal shot. And this way they left him for dead, and he was able to survive this whole thing. But that whole experience, along with a few other things that happened to my teacher, he also played some minor role in the whole Watergate scandal. This all taught him that the agency is very much dirty. It has some good people working for it, as all agencies do, as all government organizations have their share of good apples along with bad apples.
Right.
But the problem seems with the CIA, the problem seems to be both systemic and individuals. And so, I mean, at the end of my article, I basically suggest that this agency needs to be scrapped and a new intelligence gathering organization has to be put together. But I begin my article off by looking at one of the recent scandals that have come to light, just another one added to the CIA's long chronology, where two countries, Poland and Romania, were being investigated by the European Union for human rights abuses and torture camps that were being ran by the CIA. And the EU came out with the allegations, and shortly thereafter, the leftist center ACLU came out with allegations too, that they were basically outsourcing torture, going to other countries where human rights laws were rather lax or non-existent, and doing what they wanted to do to these prisoners there, which they couldn't do to them here.
Yeah.
And this isn't their first, and it probably won't be the last immoral act that we see coming out of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so I wanted to look at in my article what is the driving force behind the criminality that we see with the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, to listen to anti-government types, the problem is that the Central Intelligence Agency is merely an extension of a corrupt government. And that is a gross oversimplification. And
I agree with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the problem with research into political conspiracy and into elite deviance and into elite criminality is that the whole thing is just filled with a lot of bad researchers that come across a few facts, and then they're not able to properly analyze those facts, and they make these statements that are just oversimplifications that are just gross. I mean, a good example is that back when people started to look seriously into the Kennedy assassination, there was a lot of good research in that field, but you had certain researchers saying that the CIA killed Kennedy.
Yeah.
And that's a gross oversimplification. I have no doubt that there was individuals from the Central Intelligence Agency involved. Chiefly James Jesus Angleton, probably Alan Dulles, although he was out of the agency at that time. He certainly played a role in the cover-up with the commission, the Warren Commission. But it wasn't the government as a whole. It was what you would call a secret team. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty coined that term, and it's basically secured individuals that are inside and outside of government that receive intelligence reports from the Central Intelligence Agency, from the National Security Agency, and from any number of other alphabet organizations in the intelligence community. But if you look at the Central Intelligence Agency and the criminality and look for the motivation, you're going to find that it's not motivated by the government so much as it's motivated by its founding fathers. Now, its founding fathers are all individuals that were part of what we'd call the power elite. And the power elite we're talking about entities that exist above government.
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah, we're talking about wealthy individuals that use government as their prostitutes, but by and large, they themselves are not the government.
Well, let's look at Soros.
Yeah, exactly. He's back in the news right now.
Oh, yeah.
Soros was able to run all these speculative raids on all these different countries and ruin them.
Yes.
Like the Thailand, the Asian countries really felt his wrath. And yet you can't call him necessarily a government figure at all. Now he has played his part in politics. He was the driving force behind Kerry's bid to defeat Bush, but the thing is that he doesn't hold any kind of office per se.
No.
So now people almost right off the bat, they can recognize the cult of intelligence, the CIA, because even though it's fiercely secretive, it has a definite geographical location that you can find on a map, that you can go and visit here in the United States, in Langley, Virginia. You can go to where their building is, there in Virginia. The major news media acknowledges their existence. The government acknowledges their existence. The power elite, it's not that simple. The power elite being the cult of oligarchy. It's not so easy for people to detect the existence of the cult of oligarchy. And the reason that probably is because the cult of oligarchy is what one would call a virtual state. Now, Philip Bobbitt is the one that came up with the term virtual state. And he used it to refer to Al-Qaeda, and it most certainly does. But the power elite constitute a virtual state too. And Philip Bobbitt's definition for this term is as followed, quote, "The virtual state has many of the characteristics of other states: a trained standing army, and an intelligence cadre, a treasury, and a source of revenue, and a civil service, and even a rudimentary welfare system for the families of its fighters. But it is borderless. It declares wars, makes alliances with other states, and is global in scope, but lacks a definable location on the map." So the cult of oligarchy has the status of being a virtual state.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't have any kind of geographical boundaries to speak of, people just miss it and don't know that they're there. And they have various congregations, the cult of oligarchy does. I'm certain that you're probably well aware of the CFR, of the Trilateral Commission, of the Bilderberg Group. You're well aware of Bohemian Club members meeting at the Grove. These are various congregations of the cult. But most people don't even know about these groups. And you still have to look at this, even though it's not detected by your radar as easily as some government organization or some rogue state. So it's important to do a study into the power elite, into the cult of oligarchy. There's a lot of great books out there that people should buy to study this. And not all of them are what you would call the conspiracy books. Some of the best researchers don't even fall into that category.
Right.
C. Wright Mills, he's written the book over the power elite. His book is called The Power Elite, that everybody should read. William Domhoff wrote a book called Who Really Rules America that everybody should read, that basically goes into the power elite. And there's a lot more that I could pull off the top of my head, but people really need to just get out and and do the footwork themselves and do the study. Well, when we have to, the reason that we have to examine the cult of oligarchy is because it's wedded to the cult of intelligence. And it has been wedded to the cult of intelligence since the CIA's very beginnings. Now, if you want to look at the oligarchical ties to the agency, they really begin with a committee known as the Lovett Committee. And that committee was created on October 22nd, 1945. And it was created by the Secretary of War, which was, I believe, Robert Patterson. And it was supposed to advise the government on how to organize U.S. intelligence after World War II. And the committee was headed by Robert Lovett, and Lovett would recommend that that the Central Intelligence Agency should be a separate agency, that it could consult with the armed forces, but as far as the field of foreign espionage and counter-espionage goes, it should be the sole collecting agency. And he wanted it to have its own budget, and he wanted it to have its funding come from Congress without any kind of open kind of public hearings on where the money was going and how the money would be spent and how much was being given. And so what you got is you have this organization being set up that would be renegade. And it would be going off in a rogue trajectory, but the problem is that because it would have a government charter, it would be essentially acting as an extension of the United States government. So I'm sure you can see the conflict of interest. Well, this individual, Robert Lovett, has an interesting background. See, Lovett was a member of Yale's Skull and Bones. And Skull and Bones is this secret society that was imported here to the United States from Germany in 1832 by William H. Russell. Mm-hmm. And many people, myself included, believe that Skull and Bones is an Illuminati subsidiary. There's a lot involved in its rituals and a lot involved in its philosophical teachings and its occult beliefs that almost mirror the Bavarian Illuminist. So it is quite possible that they are a direct descendant. And you see that a lot of groups out there nowadays that claim to be direct descendants, but they have nothing by which they can prove this. For instance, you have the Freemasons basically claiming that they are directly descended from the Templar Knights. Well, the truth of the matter is that they probably had picked up on some of the occult teachings that the Templars had, but there is no evidence that it was handed down from generation to generation, from Templar to Templar, until you get to the Masons of today. But instead, it's quite possible that they simply took what they found of the Templars' occult teachings and took them as their own and claimed to be direct descendants to feel more important. And but with Skull and Bones, I believe that we do have a case for direct descendancy. Now, this Skull and Bones group is basically gained its notoriety or its infamy, if you will, for having these rituals that thematically celebrate death. I mean, the whole thing is wrapped in death. You have skeletons, you have bones, you have a big building that is black, called the tomb that they reside at.
Yeah.
You have I mean, let's face it, that's death worship.
Well, that's just like Halloween. That's the Day of the Dead, the celebration of death.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Huh. Gee.
Well, so that disturbs a lot of people.
Yes.
Both Christian and non-Christians get disturbed by that fact, and that's as it should be. The problem is even deeper than that, though, and the problem what makes that even more disturbing, what makes Skull and Bones even more disturbing, is where its recruits come from. Its recruits come from blue blood families, and the organization essentially acts as a blue blood conduit. Because, take for instance, the founder of Skull and Bones, William H. Russell. The Russell family made huge wealth during the 19th century through Russell and Company. And Russell and Company, many people don't know this, but it was an opium syndicate. Mm-hmm. And the Russells had basically married into a lot of the ruling class families in Connecticut. And what happened was Samuel Russell, who was a second cousin to William H. Russell, the Bones founder, established Russell and Company around 1823, and he basically bought out the Perkins Syndicate and made Connecticut the center of this whole U.S. opium racket. And many of these families that were with him in this, offhand, some of the families would be Coolidge, Forbes, Delano, which we get Franklin Delano Roosevelt from, the Cabot, Lowell, Cushing, these families, and the Russell family made tremendous amounts of money off of this trade in opium. And this blue blood power block became known as the Boston Brahmin. And so this puts Skull and Bones right in the orbit of elite criminality, because these are the families that Skull and Bones is going to draw from. After all, William H. Russell, the founder of Skull and Bones, was a second cousin to the founder of Russell and Company, Samuel Russell. And so there's going to, of course, be this kind of interaction between the secret society Skull and Bones and these different individuals in the opium syndicate, in the Boston Brahmin. And so, I mean, this was probably what motivated Robert Lovett to make the kind of suggestions and recommendations that he made with his Lovett Committee when it came to forming the Central Intelligence Agency. This was what was motivating his thoughts. When he was in Skull and Bones, I believe that he was exposed to the blue blood philosophies, and it probably motivated him to come up with an agency that would act as the enforcement arm of oligarchs under the pretext of collecting intelligence for the United States. So we have the beginning of an oligarchical influence in the CIA right there at the very beginning. And if you'll notice, Georgianne, I'm sure some of the people in the audience are aware of this as well. The Central Intelligence Agency is littered with bonesmen.
Oh yes.
I like it. It's also. I mean, Porter Goss, who just recently resigned, and of course former DCI George H.W. Bush. I mean, like the whole organization. It's almost like J.P. Morgan's syndicate here in the United States. It was just his banking firm was involved in just had a lot of bonesmen in it, and once you started to get away from the financial center towards Morgan Guarantee, trust and whatnot, you find even more bonesmen involved. But it's the same thing applies here. You know, it's just inundation. This organization is inundated with bonesmen. Now, another major influence upon the CIA that was basically making it into a vehicle for oligarchy is the Council on Foreign Relations. And see, what brought the CIA into existence was an act called the National Security Act of 1947, and it was written by a man named Clark Clifford, but the writing of that act was supervised by two brothers, John Foster and Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles himself would go on to be DCI for a time until he got fired by John Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs. But both of those brothers were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And Allen Dulles would even be a president of the CFR. But a former executive assistant to the deputy director of CIA, Victor Marchetti, and a former State Department analyst, John Marks, pointed out that the Council on Foreign Relations influence over the Central Intelligence Agency had continued up to the present day, because the CIA's principal constituency in the American public have come from the Council. And whenever the CIA needed somebody to front their proprietary companies, they would almost always turn to Council members to front them. And so it's important for us to look into the Council on Foreign Relations and what their story is, to understand the CIA a little bit more. And to look at the CFR's whole beginnings, you actually have to go back to 1870 to a man named John Ruskin. And he was an Oxford professor, and he came and he hit Oxford, according to Carroll Quigley, he hit Oxford like an earthquake. And he began to preach this imperialist gospel to his students. But his was a little bit different of an imperialism than what had come before. It was known as the New Imperialism, and it was based on social reform and social justice. And it was basically the gospel went something like this: that the British ruling class had a wonderful tradition of beauty, of decency, of self-discipline, of freedom, of law. And this tradition was in danger of going extinct, because what was going to happen was that the minority which was the upper class Englishman, was going to be swallowed up by the majority of the people. The lower and middle class people throughout the world, the non-English people. And that tradition was, when that happened, when they got subsumed, that tradition would get lost forever. So the only way you could save it, could save that tradition, is if you were to extend the British Empire in the ruling class tradition, to the lower classes in England and to the non-English masses globally. And one of the individuals that paid close attention to what Ruskin was saying was an individual named Cecil Rhodes. And Rhodes, as a matter of fact, would keep a copy, longhand copy, of Ruskin's inaugural lecture for 30 years in his pocket. He kept it. He was just totally inspired by the man. So Rhodes, under inspiration from Ruskin, went to South Africa, and he monopolized the diamond fields there through De Beers' consolidated mine. And that brings up that opens a whole new box, so to speak, because most people don't know this, but diamonds are not rare. The diamond monopoly is the biggest joke coming and going. There's just diamonds aplenty on this planet.
No, that's true.
But the way that they've manipulated things, they've kept the price of diamonds high, and they've even gone into different parts of the world and changed whole cultures to get people to think that you have to have some kind of romantic kind of thing going on as far as courtship goes, and that you have to buy a diamond if you're going to marry a woman, and you have to give her a diamond ring, and the whole scam has earned the diamond cartel well into the billions of dollars.
That's right.
And that's a whole other story, but it began here with Rhodes. And Rhodes was able to start this diamond cartel with the help of Lord Rothschild, and Rhodes would become the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony, and that would last for about 6 years, from about 1890 to 1896. He would give money to political parties. He controlled the parliamentary seats in England and South Africa, and he just went on to become a very powerful individual, and it was all because of the inspiration that Ruskin's imperialistic message had on him. So what eventually came to pass was that Ruskin, his disciples, led by Rhodes, began to put together a secret society. And this secret society would basically take up the cause of British expansionism. And it included individuals like Alfred Milner, who would set up the Rhodes. He was the dominant trustee in the Rhodes Trust, and he would set up the Rhodes Kindergarten. And basically, he would be the ones behind the Round Table Group and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Glazebrook, Arthur Glazebrook, Arnold Toynbee, Sir George Parkin, Philip Littleton Gell, Henry Birchenau. These individuals all devoted their lives to Ruskin's ideas and formed this secret society. And what happened was that after Rhodes passed away, Milner kept the whole thing going, and he basically basically organized the outer group into what was known as Milner's Kindergarten. And in 1909 to about 1913, the Milner's Kindergarten would be organizing these semi-secret groups, and they were known as roundtable groups. And in 1919, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, which is the club for British MI6 and MI5 intelligence, would be formed to act as a front for the roundtable groups. And then you'd have institutes of international affairs in the come to the United States, and that became this stateside sister organization would become the Council on Foreign Relations. And so the Council on Foreign Relations would eventually come to actually enter the United States government. At first it was just a discussion club here in the United States and didn't really have that much of an influence over the United States government. But that would all change around 1939. And what happened in 1939 was Hitler, of course, invaded Poland. He broke his little agreement with Stalin. That was over. And needless to say, after Poland was invaded, Britain and France went to war with Germany, and that was the beginning of World War II. Well, Hamilton Fish Armstrong, 2 weeks later, after this invasion and after the war had started, he met in Washington with Walter Mallory, and Hamilton Fish Armstrong was the editor of Foreign Affairs, which Foreign Affairs is the journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. And Mallory was the CFR's executive director. But they met in Washington, and they met with the Assistant Secretary of State, George Messersmith. And they had a proposal for Messersmith. They said, hey, the Council can help you out. We'll help you come up with your policy for wartime, and we'll help you also come up with your policy for the post-war period, too. What we can do is we can have these study groups, and they'll work in coordination with the State Department, and they'll come up with all sorts of little recommendations for the President and for the Department of State. And Messersmith, the secretary, the Assistant Secretary of State, wasn't about to say no, because he himself was a member of the CFR. So the CFR was invited into the State Department as the War and Peace Studies Project. And from that point on, it became an adjunct of the United States government. It was a temporary adjunct, but that didn't matter, because while it was acting as a government adjunct, its members began to spread out throughout the government. And the War and Peace Studies Project received money from the Rockefeller Foundation, and basically what all of this led to was what I call in my article the privatization of foreign policy. Foreign policy for America no longer became about benefiting the United States citizens or any other country for that matter. Foreign policy was now basically just a vehicle for the power elite. And the CIA, what it does is this privatized foreign policy that the CFR came out with needed an enforcer, And that's what the CIA does. It brings the muscle.
Yeah.
And the way it brings the muscle is covert operations. And if you want an example of a covert operation on behalf of this privatized foreign policy, you got to look to 1972. What happened in 1972 in Jamaica was Michael Manley came to power and became prime minister. And what he did was basically he negotiated a 51% controlling interest in Jamaica's bauxite industry. And bauxite is, of course, the mineral that is processed into aluminum. Now, there was four U.S. aluminum companies there: Kaiser, Reynolds, Alcoa, and Revere. And needless to say, they did not like this one bit. Manley was going up against the oligarchs when he did this, because multinational corporations such as Kaiser, Reynolds, Alcoa, Revere, they are the locus of power for elites. So what happened is the end of 75 and going into 76, there was an operation, it was just spooky, called Operation Werewolf, where the CIA went and began to work with the JLP, who was the opposition party to the People's National Party, which had brought Michael Manley to power. And all these violent acts began to pop up all over the country in kind of the same way that we saw lawlessness start to pop up under the Jacobins. With what the Jacobins were using, they were causing this great fear across the country to make people lose confidence in the monarchy and in the monarchy's ability to protect them. We have very similar acts of violence. We had food supplies being poisoned. We had water supplies being poisoned. At least there was rumor of it. The defense forces there in Jamaica had found guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition and explosives, and they didn't know where all of this stuff was popping up from. And basically, the violence got to a point to where Manley had to declare a state of emergency. And he was no stupid. He was no dummy. He kind of got the idea that there were forces that were not from this country at work, that were not from Jamaica at work.
Yeah.
Non-Jamaican forces at work there. And eventually, this whole thing led to the destabilization of Jamaica. The IMF came in and said, "We'll help you," and you know what kind of help they offer.
Sure.
The conditions that they have for their bailout money basically leads to you tearing down your country's infrastructure, and that's what happened to Jamaica. So when you look at that case, there can be little wonder why the Central Intelligence Agency is called the private army of the Fortune 500. And that's just one case. Again, Chile is just a blatant example. When Allende came to power, he was going to nationalize industry, and it scared the living daylights out of ITT and Anaconda Copper and Pepsi Cola. And Richard Corey began an above-ground campaign against Chile, where he said, "Well, not one nut or boat will reach Chile under the Allende regime." And meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, there was a second track. He was track number one, but there was a second track to the campaign that involved getting weapons to military leaders that were interested in staging a coup against Allende. And of course, Allende was eventually assassinated and taken out, and Augusto Pinochet was brought to power. And that's another example. So, I mean,
and Pinochet was responsible for a lot of people disappearing.
Oh yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, dirty war.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So there's question as to what do we do about this situation? In '76, the infamous year of intelligence, Frank Church had his committee, and he basically found an agency that was out of control, and he was able to pull the reins, so to speak, a little bit on the agency. But now, in this time, and in this era, things seem to be getting out of control again. First of all, some of the more sound analysts that the agency had were kicked out, or they were shut up when it came to Iraq, and as to whether Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And a similar campaign like that happened under Reagan, when certain factions within the government were wanting a war with little Nicaragua.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this problem is not going to go away anytime soon, and so the question is, how do you fix it? Well, really, what I think is that the agency has to be scrapped. You have to dismantle it.
I agree.
And you're going to have to start over again. The question is, however, at this juncture, is who has got the intestinal fortitude to do such a thing? Because we already had one president that promised that he was going to scatter the agency to the four winds, and that was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And Kennedy was assassinated shortly after he made these intentions known.
Well, they killed him, his brother, and the young Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and nobody, there is hardly anybody that I know that really believes what the Warren Commission concluded on Kennedy's assassination. President Richard Nixon actually was a skeptic. And there were tapes of his first 6 months in office during his second term where Nixon actually said that the Warren Commission was, quote, the greatest hoax that has ever been perpetuated, unquote. Now, Nixon, of course, didn't elaborate on that statement, but all you have to do is you have to watch the Zapruder film. Watch the Zapruder film, and you'll see Kennedy's head fly backward.
That's right.
From what is clearly a bullet impact from the front.
And then Jackie just is frantic to get out of the car.
Yeah.
She climbs over the trunk of the car.
Yeah.
Because she thinks she's going to get shot.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that the commission was saying that Oswald had shot Kennedy from behind to the right in the book depository. Yeah. And his head wouldn't have flown backwards. It would have gone forwards if he had got hit from behind.
That's right.
Second of all, if you ever take a trip to Dealey Plaza, there's a tremendous tree that is obstructing your view from the book depository to where Kennedy's motorcade was going. And that tree is just as big to this very day, and it would obstruct his view, and it would get in the way of the bullet, really. You know, it's a hard shot that somebody has to make would have to take of an individual not driving towards them but driving away. That's an incredibly difficult shot for somebody to take. And it would take an extremely skilled marksman, and we know that Oswald was poor when it came to marksmanship.
Yeah, he was a patsy.
Yeah, he was a patsy all the way. Now, I won't agree with the 9/11 Truth Movement when they say that those guys were patsies in the plane, but now Oswald is the perfect example of a patsy.
Yeah.
And everything. Now, the lesson that came from the Kennedy assassination was reinforced by later strange deaths that hook up to the agency.
Okay, let's go on to a part 2. That's a good cliffhanger right there.
Sure.
Okay, everybody. We're moving on to part 2. This is Georgianne Hughes with Paul Collins, and we're talking about Unholy Matrimony. His new article, and we'll be right back.